Presenter is Debbie Lashbrook. Debbie has been teaching BERNINA software for over 30 years, and currently she is the BERNINA software specialist. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone. You can take projects from drab to fabulous with the addition of crystals. CrystalWork is one of the components of DesignWorks software and can be used to add a little bit of sparkle to your projects. And although the slides don't really do the pictures justice or the actual embroidery justice, I tried taking a picture of the crystal, of the design without the crystals in the upper left here, and then a picture of the designs with the crystals added. And like I said, the picture really doesn't do this justice, but crystals really add some pizzazz to your projects. The topics for today include, I want to go over the supplies that you can get for doing your crystal designs. I want to talk about using the CrystalWork tool, all the steps that are involved. And then there is a two-part software lesson. One is going to be on creating a stitch design from a vector image and then adding crystals to this design. And the second lesson is on choosing fonts and creating crystal lettering. So some of the supplies that you're going to want to find, first of all, crystal template material. And this is a peel-off template that will be used to cut out the holes for the crystals. Crystals come in different shapes, actually different sizes and different colors. Now, our punch tool only works with round crystals, but you can get all sorts of colors as well as sizes. This crystal pick stick is a great way to get it, grab those crystals that misbehave and are not in the correct place, or maybe they got into the template upside down. And you can use those to grab the crystals and get them in the right side up. Then crystal backing board is a heavy board that is used to put the template on to give it some stability. And you do need this to back the crystal template. And then the crystal transfer film, it actually is placed over the crystals to pick them up, to put them on your design. And it is resistant to heat. And then of course you have the CrystalWork accessory that you will need for CrystalWork designs. So one of your first steps is to prepare the hoop. And notice that it isn't hooped in the traditional way. The carrier paper that is often parchment paper is hooped, is actually placed on the inner hoop, and then the outer hoop slips on top of it. So the carrier paper ends up being on top of the hoop, not on the underneath part. And parchment paper is often used for this carrier paper. And then the template material, the backing is peeled off and it's placed on top of the parchment paper. Next, the straight stitch or cutwork stitch plate is placed on your machine. And here's the CrystalWork tool or accessory, all the different parts that come with it. You have the foot, you have a container that catches all the punch outs from the crystal punch tool. You have four different sizes of punches, and they align with these plates that are put in the container. So it's very important that you use the correct size punch with the correct size plate. Remove the needle and you will replace that needle with the punch that you plan to use, the size that you're going to be using. Then attach the foot, and this receptacle or container that will be used to catch all the punches needs to go in this middle hole of the stitch plate. This prong fits right in the middle of the hole. And then all the template punches are collected in this container. Once you get the correct plate on, you'll want to roll down the hand wheel and make sure that the punch goes directly in that hole. Because remember, there are 2 holes in your stitch plate, and if you get it in the one that's forward rather than the one in the middle, this punch can hit the plate and it can cause your machine to jam. This chart shows you the different sizes of crystals that can be used with our plates. The SS stands for stone size, but most often you will see crystals for purchase in millimeters. So you can use this chart to figure out the stone size that is used in the software that corresponds to the millimeters of the crystals you have. After you bring the design into the machine, and we'll talk about how you export a design a little bit later when we're working in the software, you punch the designs, and these designs don't take very long at all. As a matter of fact, if you blink, you may miss the entire process. They usually take about 1 minute tops, and maybe if it's a little bit more complicated, 2 to 3 minutes, but they do not take long at all. After it's punched, you will need to empty the container, and you can see the crystal template holes that are collected. These are very sticky, and you can remove them from the container. You will, at the beginning of the design, you'll see this message that it serves as a reminder for you to empty your crystal container before you get started. If you're doing a lot of crystal punching, you will, I'm sorry that my allergies are really bothering me, but if you do a lot of crystal punching in one design, you may see this message midway through a design, and the machine, then you'll go ahead and remove the plate and clean out the crystals template material out of the container. Peel the crystal template off of your parchment paper, and you can use wax paper as a substitute if you don't have parchment paper, and then place it on the backing board, and that will serve as your template then for dumping your crystals, using the brush to brush off the excess. And here is when that pickup stick really helps. If a crystal gets upside down, you can use that to get the crystal, turn it right side up. Then you place the transfer tape over the top of the template, and I always use my hand to make sure that it adheres well, and then carefully peel up the tape, take it to your project, place it on the project, and press. Now for pressing, you want to make sure you have no steam in the iron. You want to also use the part of the iron that has a very flat surface. You don't want to use the area that has the steam vents in it. So if you have an iron that has one area that is very flat, that's the area that you want to use. I have a press, and it works wonderfully for crystals. So if you do have a press, that is the preferred method, but you can certainly use a regular iron. Just don't use steam with it. Now, our first lesson is going to be taking this vector image that's part of your design, and when you bring it in, it converts directly to a painted design and is ready to send to the machine for painting. But we're going to take that vector design and do a little bit of editing and actually create a stitch file from it. And then we're going to apply different decorative stitches to this design. So you can create all sorts of spirograph looking designs. And this is a wall hanging that was totally created with vectors that were inside, that are inside DesignWorks software. I did use the 55 leather roller foot to do some echo quilting around the designs as I was putting it together. Now for crystal options, you have different tools that you can use to create your crystal designs. First of all, you can individually place crystals on an embroidery design with the Create Crystal tool in the software. You can also draw a line or draw a shape and then use that to either apply crystal fills or outlines. And then you can also use lettering and convert lettering into crystals. So when we add our crystals, we'll be using the Create Crystal shape to add this one crystal to the center. Then we're going to create a line of crystals, drawing a line and using the Array tool to add the crystals around evenly this design. And then we're going to create the circle of crystals with the Create Ellipse tool. Our second lesson is going to be on crystal lettering, because there's some special things that are necessary to do when we create designs that are totally crystal lettering. It's very important that the lettering be readable, so there will be some editing involved. I would say 99.9% of the time you're going to have to edit. I want to talk, before we get into the software, a little bit about different font categories. And these are the 6 different font categories that I'm going to talk about. So Old English or black lettering is traditionally used in a lot of legal type of documents, and it is a very elaborate font, and it's very difficult to read, even in print, but especially with crystals. And you can see that when I brought this font in and added crystals, the letters run together. So there's definitely editing with this type of lettering. And in this lesson, you're going to learn how to edit the lettering before you apply crystals. Then we have this serif font, and serif stands for line. And if you look up here at the top of the slide and see those red lines, those are serifs. And in print, it does kind of flow nicely, and the letters all kind of flow into the next one. But these extra lines that are attached make it really difficult when it comes to crystals. And definitely the letters have to be spread apart when you use this type of font. Now, one of the best types of fonts to look for when creating crystal designs is the sans serif. This means no lines. So the lines, or the letters are themselves very straight. There's no flow into the next letter. Their thickness is pretty much the same. So with no thick and thin lines, it really is a good type to use for crystals. Then you have your handwriting fonts that are a lot of fun to use, that are very fluid, flowing. Script, cursive, and calligraphy letters would fit here. It is a more difficult font type to read, and especially when it gets into crystals. You can see that this is hardly readable at all. This is not a bad font at all. This one is, I have it in my notes here. This is Lucinda handwriting. This is script writing. This is Harlow solid italics, and this is freestyle. So the best bet, just type it in, try it, and if it doesn't work, delete it and find another type of handwriting font. The decorative novelty type would be like dingbats and web dings that you find, or in a font like this where it's got lots of intricate types of parts to it. These types of fonts are not the best for crystals. They make a great design for painting, but you will have some difficulty with crystals. You can see in this design, there's a lot of editing that needs to be done. Even with these circles at the end of this letter, if the software did not interpret it the same way for each of those spokes. Now the monospaced font has the same horizontal space for each letter. So that means that the skinny narrow letters are going to take up just as much space as the fatter letters. It's a very plain looking font, but it's a great one to use for crystals because actually the letters are pretty much already spaced for you. And so you can see how readable it is. In this case, you may find that you're going to have to bring the letters closer together. And that is done basically the same method as I'll show you in a minute, where we have to spread them out. So this slide shows you the difference between a monospaced and a proportional font. The proportional, each letter, it takes up its own space when it's proportional. But here with the monospaced, the shapes are very even. And so the letters are going to be very, very much more spread out. Courier New is one of the probably most recognizable monospaced fonts. So when you're dealing with the spacing between letters, spacing is either going to make it easier or harder to read. And you can either have too little or too much, especially when it comes to crystals. And you want to consider the area that each letter occupies, and you can respace them quite easily when you're doing crystal designs. So when we talk about some of the editing that's necessary with CrystalWork, consider the spacing of the letters. You can reshape the letters, and sometimes all caps are more readable. Those three things that are on the left side of this screen are more what you do before you apply crystals. They're easier to do when the font is in a paint mode rather than crystal mode. Then the other 6 ways to, or 5 ways, I guess, to edit on the right-hand side of the screen, that's after you convert the paintwork font to a CrystalWork font. You're going to find that you have some additional ways to edit in object properties or through separating to crystals and then moving the crystals. I want to remind you that defont.com is a great website to go to download fonts. And what's nice about this is that they're all categorized. So you can go in and download some fonts and try some different fonts and add crystals and see what happens. So some of the editing we're going to be doing, we're going to be working with the spacing of letters. And this is that old English type of font. This is how it originally came in. And here I respaced the letters a bit and added some crystals and moved some crystals around. The size of crystals also might make a difference. So that is one way you can edit the crystal fill, is just choose a different size. And you'll find that smaller crystals are more readable for crystal lettering. Another thing we can do is change the fill type. And the default fill type for crystal lettering is a single line. But in object properties, you can also change it to a shape fit. So when we work with the crystal lettering, I'm going to show you how to change it to get a shape fit. And then remember, the font style makes a difference. The clearer, cleaner lettering types of fonts make for clearer, cleaner, easily readable fonts in crystals. This is a font that did work, and it's actually from defont.com. It's called Shaded Larch, and it is a handwriting font that I found to be very easily converted into crystals. So let's go ahead and go to the software. And I want to activate my highlighter before I open the software. And we're going to first work on creating a base design. So I have already opened the software. So to begin this lesson, I'm going to go to File, New, and that's where you start whenever you want to create a new design versus opening a design. I just usually select none here, and I like a white background because it's easier to see what's going on. And then I'll click Next. And from File is where we go get our picture files. And we're going to be working with a vector image. I'll click on Browse. And I want to navigate to the file I'm going to use, which is this Paintwork. It will transfer into Paintwork when I click on Open. Then Next, and you can see that it's in the brushes palette, so it's all going to be painted stitches. And I'll click on Finish. So with this design, if I go to Auto Sequence Control to break this down into different steps, and when I click on that, a dialog box opens, and I'm just going to go OK here. And you can see I've got all the different layers of this design. And I did this so you can see that this vector file translated as a painted fill. That's the first tab in your sequence manager. And the red X means there's no outline. So if I want this to be a stitched design, I have to make sure I add an outline to all these shapes in order to, in Object Properties, to get that to be a stitched file. So the first thing I'm going to do is select different colors. And there are different ways to select. This first way we're going to select is by holding down the Control key to select multiple objects. So I'm going to zoom in here so I can get this red kind of oval shape selected around the image. And holding down the Control key allows you to select multiple objects. Now that I have them all selected, I'm going to go over to my Threads palette, and I want to add a green outline. So I'm going to scroll through, and actually it can be any color, but I'm going to do green here. So I'm going to click in the upper left corner of a colored chip in the Threads palette. That adds a green outline, and it's a stitched outline around the image. I also, while this is selected, I want to delete the fill. So by clicking in the lower right-hand corner, it will delete the fill and just leave the outline. And while all these objects are selected, I want to right-click and select Group. That just makes them much easier to select when I need to select them again. So that's one way to select. I also can use Select by Color, and that's what I'm going to do with all this yellow. I'll right-click on the yellow color chip in the Brushes palette and select by Fill Color. Then I'll come over to my Threads, and I'm going to click in the upper left corner to add an outline, and I'll click in the lower right corner of the None color chip to delete the fill. Now I could also go up into Object Properties and go to the Fill tab and select None. It's just another way. Now we're going to do the same thing with the royal blue. I'm going to right-click on the royal blue, select by Fill Color, and I'll go over to my Threads palette, and I'll add a royal blue around that, and then click in the lower right corner to delete the fill. And while that's selected, I'll right-click and group. So when I group these, which I didn't with the yellow, if you do forget that, you can always go back and use the control key and come around and select all those yellow stitches, and then right click and group those. And that makes it much easier when you're working with this design, because when I deselect and select those, they're all going to be selected. So I also have this orange left, and I can come in here and just click directly on the object, and that will select the entire orange part. So for this, I'll go to my orange colors, and I will add an orange outline by clicking in the upper left corner again, and then none in the lower right. So I still have some items that I need to get rid of, and these are all painted items, and it's really easy to get rid of these. I'll come over to my brushes palette. I'll right click, select by fill color, and press delete. And I'll right click, select by fill color, press delete. And the same with the blue. Now I still have these ovals that are going to present a problem, because for one thing, when I add decorative stitches, those are too tiny really to have a decorative stitch around. So I will need to change to delete those. Now, yes, I could go in and I could select each one and press delete, but there's another way to select that's pretty easy in the software. One of the things I want to do though is I want to select, and I'm going to zoom in here. I want to select the blue, and I'm going to right click, and remember we grouped it. I need to ungroup it in order to just get this one blue selected. And I'm going to change that just so I can have 5 colors to play with. I'm going to change that to a turquoise. And you can see it's added over in the threads. Now I still have to get rid of these circles. And the easiest way to get rid of those is to go in here, and remember how I selected the yellow. I'm going to hold down the control key and click around and select all these royal blue. And it really does help to zoom in here. You can be much more accurate when you click, when you're zoomed in. Remember, your mouse wheel zooms in. So now I have all those petals, except for this one, selected. And you can kind of tell they have these control points that show when they're selected. So that's an easy way to tell that they're selected. And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to group those. And that excludes all these tiny ovals from the selection process. So now what I have to do is select everything but these ovals. So I'll select the yellow. I want to select the orange. I want to select the turquoise. And again, zooming in will help. I want to select the royal blue, and I want to select the green. Now when I right click, I can select invert selection. So I'm telling the software to select anything that I didn't have selected, and I'll press delete. And I apparently had I didn't have the orange. So I'm going to undo that. And I need to make sure that I'll start with the orange. You need to make sure that you have everything selected that you don't want deleted when you use this. So it looks like I've got the green, the turquoise, the orange, the blue. Well, that's what undo is for, correct? I'm going to right click and invert selection again. Now I have just the squares or just these small ovals selected, and I can press delete. So now I have my design remaining that I want. I'm going to draw a bounding box around the design, and I'm going to increase this. I wanted my designs to be a little bit larger. I'll enter 150. Proportional is already checked, and then I'll press enter to make that change. Now I'll select File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Base Design and save that. Now that base design can be used to create a lot of different designs. And by changing the stitch type, by deleting parts of it, by rotating parts of it, by resizing parts of it, you can really create a lot of different spirographs. I've given you a couple of suggestions in the handout. I'm just going to show you one. That way we have plenty of time for questions. So I'll select the yellow. Again, it is grouped, so I selected all those yellow pieces. And I'm going to come over here in Object Properties and select a decorative stitch. Now remember that with these decorative stitches, you also have access to mirror style. So you can select that if you want the stitches to go in a different direction. For the turquoise, I'll select that next, and I'll select another stitch. And you can see how that stitch is added. The orange, I'll select that, and I'm going to select stitch 35 for that. You'll have lots of fun picking out these stitches. Now, while this is selected, I want to make it a little bit more separated from the turquoise. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and that resizes from center out. And I'm going to just click and drag to make that so it comes in a little bit. So you could always edit that base design in that way. For the green, I've got another stitch, and I'm going to use stitch 04. And then for, oh, I didn't have the green selected. Well, we'll do stitch 104 for the blue. That's where zooming in helps. I'll select the green next, and we'll do stitch 39. There's no wrong choice here. And so by making all these different stitches, and perhaps on one of these, I'll decide, you know, I don't really want the green. I can select that green and delete it and get a different look. Again, I didn't zoom in enough, so I selected the blue instead. Nothing like proving a point. There we go. So you can see you can make all sorts of designs. After you get your design finished, do File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Spirograph 1. Well, actually, let me rename it. That way I can not save over the one that I did earlier today. I'll name it Spirograph 2 and click Save. All right, so now we've got our base design. I could go back and just select it again, and I can start all over with a new set of designs, and that's what the handout goes over. I want to show you how to add crystals next. So let's start out with the one crystal we're going to put in the center here. So I can select that crystal, and I can choose my palette, I can choose my color, and I can choose the size that I want. And that's done in tool options for single crystals. I can then zoom in and place that crystal in the center. I can right click to end the crystals, and then I'll select the crystal by clicking on it. Now, if you look in tool options at your X and Y values, to get that right in the center, I just want both of those at 0 and press enter. And now I know that crystal is right where it needs to be. Another way we can create crystals is to use a line that we draw. And I'm going to use the Create Freehand shape to do this. And I will click somewhere on this right side of the spirograph, and I'm going to hold down the Control key, and you can see that that gives you guidelines. And that way I know I am drawing a straight line. Now I am lifting my mouse button. I don't have the mouse down anymore, the left click, but I'm dragging across, and I'm going to click again. Then I'm going to right click to end the line and press the space bar to select the line. Now to get that so it's right on the 0, I'll come up to my Y value in Tool Options, enter 0, and press enter. And now I know it aligns perfectly with the center of the hoop. I'll come over to Object Properties then to edit that. I'm going to add crystals. And I can change the size of the crystals in Object Properties. I'll click on a new size, and I can also choose a new color. And these colors are grouped in color families. So I'll choose a yellow for this. I can also change the spacing of these. I could increase the spacing if I want to, and spread the crystals out a little bit more. And now I'm ready to do the array. So with this selected, all I have to do to change to make the array is click on the rectangle array tool on the left side of the screen. Now the array is going to remember what you last used in the software, and this is set up perfectly. But if it wasn't, just remember that you can change the start angle and the end angle. I want to go in a complete circle, so it needs to be 360 degrees. I could also enter 90 as the start angle and 90 as the end angle, and it would give me that same complete circular design. And then I indicate this step count I wanted. Well, 8 was the perfect amount, but if I had used 10 the last time and pressed enter, it would give me a preview of 10. All I would have to do to change that is highlight the step count, enter 8, and press enter to give me a preview. Nothing is activated yet until I apply the circular array. So once I apply that, now I have my crystals around the design. Yet another way to add crystals would be with the shape tool. And here I'm going to select the Create Ellipse. I'm going to zoom in because I want to be as close to the center as I can get. If I hold down the Shift key as well as the Control key, I can draw a circle from the center out. The Shift key will draw it from center out. The Control key keeps it as a circle. Now I want to remove my left mouse click before I lift up on Shift and Control. Once I release the left mouse click, I can release my Shift and Control key and press the space bar to select that circle. The circle that was created a painted fill and a painted outline. I'm going to go here in Object Properties and go to the Fill tab and select None. That gets rid of the fill. And then I'll go to the Outline tab and select Crystals. Once those crystals are added, again, I can use my Object Properties to pick a new color. If I choose another color of crystals, it doesn't add crystals on top of crystals, it just selects a new color. So keep that in mind. If you change your mind, you can always select a new color of crystals. Then I can change the size. I can use 10, I can use 16, whatever I want in terms of size. I could even use 6. once you choose the size, the software automatically spaces them evenly. And I can always change that spacing in object properties as well. And the crystals will be distributed around the circle. Now they're not in perfect center, so I'll do that in Tool Options. And when I press Enter, they're now in the center of the design. I can do File, Save As, and I can call this, I can either save over this design or I can do Spirograph 2 with crystals. Either way, and click on Save. Now, when we export this design, if we click on Export and then choose our method of exporting for our machines and go ahead and complete the process, it's only going to send the stitch design. The crystals will not be sent this way. So you have to send 2 files to your machine, and you'll go to File, Export, Crystals to Machine, and you can see the template that is going to be punched. When I click on the export icon here, that sends only the crystals to the machine. Now I can choose to punch them all the different sizes, all the different colors as one, or if I want to, I could do separate templates. And that's an easy way if it's really important that you are putting those different colors in specific places. You can always punch 2 crystals. You can also be careful where you pour the crystals and brush the crystals, and then that pickup stick can really help you grab a hold of a crystal that maybe got put in a wrong area. So I normally punch all my templates as one, but you can certainly choose to do it another way. So always remember to export your crystals separately from the rest of the design. So that pretty much is the end of the first lesson. Now let's go ahead and I'll get a new design and we'll play with crystal lettering. So when I did File New, I can click on Next, and when I want a clean screen, I will click on New Graphic and click on Finish. Now, with lettering, it's always easier to work with a rotated hoop, so I'm going to go to Manage Hoop Options and place a check mark by Rotate by Hoop and click OK. That just gives me more room to play with my crystal lettering. I'll click on Edit Text, and this first font that I'm going to use is called Old English. I've selected a font size of 2.5 inches, and I can click on the screen and type in the word. When I select my rectangle selection tool, that selects the word. If I want to get it in the center of my hoop, I can use 0, 0 and press Enter. And then to change this to crystals, I just click on Crystal Fill. Now, when I deselect, you can see how the letters are all run together. It makes it very, very hard to read. So I'm going to undo that to bring it back to Paint, because it's much easier to respace the letters when you're in Paint. I'll select the Edit Shape nodes, and I can select one of these nodes, and if I hold down the Control key, I've got my guideline, and I can move that letter along the guideline. It's very important that I deselect and then come and select that other, and I'll show you in a minute why. So I'll move that. If I go ahead and click on this part, and I hold down the Control key, again to have the guideline. If I still hold the control key down and click on this letter and then move it, I'm actually going to be moving two letters. So I want to make sure and deselect every time. I'll hold down the control key, move the letters, and I'm spreading these apart and there's why you want to always deselect. And for these other letters, I'll move those a different way. So the idea is just spread these letters out so that when they're converted into crystals, they're more readable. So once I get them spread out, I'll select it and click on Crystal Fill. Now there's still some editing that needs to be done. They're not very readable. And one of the things I want you to note are these yellow X's. That means the crystals are too close together. They will only show if I go to the View menu and make sure Overlapping Crystals is checked. So in order to move these crystals to separate them, I have to select the design and click on Separate to Crystals. When I do that, and the crystals are still grouped, so I need to also right-click and ungroup them. Now when I deselect, I can come in here and select a crystal and move it. Now to help you with your editing, one of the things that I would suggest that you do is you're going to select the crystals and you can move the crystals a bit, like change the size of the lettering. That sometimes will give you a little bit more room to make the crystals more readable. This font is not a very good font, but I can also come in here and take this crystal that's here and move it. That looks more like a Y now. And I could delete crystals. I can move crystals. And you can see why this font is not a very good one. I can also add a crystal by clicking on the Add Crystal and add a crystal. So by manipulating this, you might be able to make it into a readable font. And I've given some suggestions on the handout so that you can work with this a bit. Notice that when I select the letters, there is an outline that appears, and this will also help you when you're trying to make the letters more readable, but not the best font to use. Let's go ahead and add another type of font. And so I'll click on Edit Text again, and I'm just going to scroll down here beyond the hoop. This time I'm going to select Arial. And Arial Black is a nice readable font. So I'll click, I'm going to use that same size and just type in the word crystals. Select the rectangle selection tool. I would need to move these crystals the same way I edited these if I wanted to. Let's click on Crystal Fill, and again deselect, and you can see this is already a more readable font. If I wanted to change the type of fill with this, and I'm going to make these letters a little bit taller here and a little bit wider to do this. That's an easy way to change it, and this is very, very readable at this point. But let's say I wanted to do size 6 crystals. And I could change the fill type here. So it's now a single line, but I could also choose Shape Fit. And actually, those crystals are fairly readable if the letters are moved slightly apart. And to do that, I need to separate to crystals. this is just another way to increase the spacing. I'm going to right click and I want to ungroup the crystals, and then I can drag a bounding box around a section of crystals, and I'll right click and group it. And then while it's all selected, I'm using my left arrow key to move all those crystals. So this is just another way to space them. Then I'll drag a bounding box around the next group of crystals, right click and group it, and move it. So you can kind of play with the spacing as you go with this. And I'll do the S here, right click and group, and then use the right arrow key. So you get the idea. And a lot of times, especially if you do the shape fit, even with a very plain font, you are going to end up needing to space them. I'll right click and group, move the crystals again. And I'm grouping them just to make it easier for them to be moved. You've got to be careful about drawing your box around only those crystals you want, because remember, each crystal is separated. And you can see that in Sequence Manager. I have 430 crystals in this design. So I would continue to do that to space out my crystals. And then in this case, if there are only crystals in the design, all I have to do is go File, Export, Crystals to Machine, and I'll have my crystals ready to export. So Julie, that's the end of the lesson. Do I have any questions?
Sure. Thanks, Debbie. As a reminder to everyone, you can post questions in the handouts pane, but I will go over the few we have right now. Where the stitches come to the middle, can that cause a hole?
If there are enough stitches, yes, it can. So in that, you've got to be careful about the type of stitches you select. These are spread out enough, and with the yellow stitching being the yellow part of the design, they're far enough away. But these stitches are not going to create a hole because they're spaced enough. But you do have to keep an eye out on that. And that's one of the reasons that I didn't keep that circular area in the design. I deleted the orange color from the center, or the blue color, I think it was, from the center.
Okay. Let's see. For us, the Sequence Manager, how does the Sequence Manager determine the design elements in the order?
Okay, repeat the question, please.
I think if you could go over the Sequence Manager and how the design is separated in the Sequence Manager.
Okay, when we are working with a draw file that is in the software, the sequence is determined by the software, and you'll find that auto sequence control is collapsed. And you can see that even if I collapse it now by clicking on it and activating it, my sequence is only one layer. As you're creating a design, you determine the stitch order from the way you create the design. So you have more control when this is deactivated. If I deactivate this, I'm always going to get this dialog box. And usually I keep this at nothing unless I have an outline that's around a design, and then I'll use advanced. But usually I just leave the design in the order that it was created and click OK. And that creates your separate trays. And in this case, I've got my turquoise that's going to be stitching first, My orange is stitching next, and the green is actually stitching in different ways or different times. So in order to change this, and this is in the handout, I click and drag on the trays to combine the different colors. So I want my yellows all together, and I'll just click and drag until the yellows are all together. And let me move this over here so we can see better. So I've got all my greens. And remember, this group by color is what you can do to, it's either on or off, either colors are grouped or not. So you can see I need to move this down to get my blues together. And now my yellows. So that makes for a much clearer idea of the way this is now going to stitch. It's going to stitch the turquoise first, then the orange, then the green, then the blue, then the yellow, and then the crystals, of course, are added last. But if you want a design separated into trays, deactivate your auto sequence control, and then you can click and drag on the layers to stitch in the way that you want them to stitch.
Okay, great. Vanita says hi.
Hi, Vanita.
Teresa would like to know, do the embroidery stitches stitch over each other, or does the software remove overlaps?
No, with paint, overlap is removed, but these will stitch over one another. And I know when I did that quilted, or the wall hanging, the quilted wall hanging, there were some cases where I wish I would have moved them a little bit more. But you can always, remember, resize, or you can, if you do a test stitch out, which is still a good idea to do, and find out that there's too much, you can select one of those colors and delete it, and that will open up the design a bit.
Okay.
But I did not create a hole. Some of the areas were dense, but there is no remove overlap for the stitches in this software.
Okay, one more question came through. When CutWork prepares the hole for Crystal and it overlaps the decorative stitching, how do we prevent the stitching from coming out of the project?
Okay, repeat that question.
When CutWork prepares the hole for the CrystalWork and it overlaps the decorative stitching, how do we prevent stitching?
Okay. Remember that you're going to have two separate files. You are going to have a stitch file that does the spirograph, and then you're going to have a crystal file that punches the template. So you're not even going to use the punch tool on the stitch design. The crystals are going to be in a separate file. The CrystalWork template is punched, and then you prepare those with the transfer tape to press the crystals on the stitch design. So you will never have that because the crystals are not, when you export this file, it only exports the stitch design and not the crystals.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that was the last question that came in. And I want to remind everyone that the webinar and the handouts will be available in a couple days. You can go to the website, bernina.com, and click on the Learn and Create tab. Then you'll go to Classes, Webinars, and then go into the Software tab. And that's where you'll find all the previously recorded webinars. Are you going there right now, Debbie?
I'm going there right now. So Learn and Create, Webinars,
Classes, Webinars.
I'm a little slow here because of the go to Webinars open. And then if I click on Software.
Yes.
And then it is, these are all the software webinars, and that's where you'll find this webinar as well.
Yeah, those are all the
Not
previous
tomorrow.
ones.
Not tomorrow though, right, Julie?
No, maybe. Yeah, because yeah, it's out of my hands. I have to put it all together and then I forward it on to someone else, and then then it should be within a couple days, but maybe tomorrow if everything goes smoothly. Okay, and then also on the website you can sign up for our newsletter, and then you will receive emails about future webinars. Also, we have a Facebook page that you can join to get all the latest information on what's going on at Bernina. So great. Yes, on behalf of Bernina, I want to say thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you, Debbie, for all the wonderful information. And yeah, hope everyone has a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.